All right, can you guys all see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool. Hopefully this is working. All right. Hopefully this works. All right. So, Unit 3 is all about cellular energetics, like I talked about. So we're going to talk initially about metabolism um, and the flow of energy, which we're going to mainly talk about today, and then enzymes, which we're going to talk about Friday in more detail. Enzymes are going to be the really, really, really important thing that I want to really focus on and have you guys understand very well because it's by far the most important part of biology um, across the board. And I say that like with absolute certainty. It is the most important thing in biology. Um, and it's usually the explanation um, for a lot of things like processes, disorders, things like that is um, the functioning of an enzyme or dysfunction. So we need to have a really good understanding of that. All right. So uh, initially, we're going to talk about cells and the flow of energy. So this is should be hopefully a review from physical science, just this part here of what energy is. And energy is just the ability to do work or bring about a change. So we're going to translate this into terms in biology and how this exists in uh, a body, a cell, um, a plant, things like that. So kinetic energy, it's the energy of motion. This could be water going over a waterfall. This could also be mechanical energy, like movement. And we're going to see how this energy is transferred into another source when we look at the laws of thermodynamics in a minute. Um, Potential energy is the stored energy, usually stored as chemical energy, um, and the food we eat. So, you know, one thing that I like to think about this is, I do a lot of running, and like really serious runners who get crazy about it will refer to food as fuel. Um, and in a way it is, but then I think that that's a little what's the word, psychotic, because it's like you're not enjoying food, and I love food, so I never want to think of food as just fuel, um, but in a sense it is. You need gas to make your car go. You need fuel, potential energy, to convert it to mechanical energy and get you to move. So this is a nice little diagram that we're going to break down. Every source of energy comes from the sun, which I'm sure you guys know. That's where all of this energy is coming from. It's from the sun. And the sun transfers the energy, um, and it's collected by plants. And most of it is not absorbed and is instead released as heat, which we can feel. Then the plants that absorb that energy, a lot of it is transferred into a stable molecule. Uh, in the case of plants, glucose. Uh, but still, most of it is released as heat because it requires heat to be released to actually form glucose. Then that glucose is eaten by or transferred or stored in fruits or starch deposits like potatoes, things like that, seeds. Um, it's all stored there and then eaten by you know, animals or humans, whatever. Um, and it's exerted as mechanical energy. And when we exert mechanical energy, we release heat. So heat's always released, and energy is always transferred. Those are the big points. So the two laws of thermodynamics. The first, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form into another. Photosynthesizing leaves capture solar energy. Some of it's used to form carbs, like glucose, um, from carbon dioxide and water, but most of it dissipates as heat. The second law is the law of entropy. What does entropy mean? Do you guys remember?
The like disorganization, isn't it?
Bingo. That's right. And I like that you said disorganization because I always think of like randomness and disorder, but disorganization is a better way to think about it, because it makes a lot more sense when we talk about it in this context. So yeah, it's the level of disorganization. Um, like when a process is carried out, it's always going to go into the direction of raising the overall entropy or raising the overall disorganization. Things do not want to be structured and put neatly together. They want to be disorganized. Um, that's the direction that things are going to go. So when energy is changed from one form or another, there's a loss of energy that is available to do work. Um, no process requiring a conversion of energy is ever 100% efficient. And again, the majority of energy lost is due to, or is lost as heat. So we're going to talk more about this second law. This is just a pretty straightforward example of photosynthesis. Unfortunately, we are going to get super specific with photosynthesis and cellular respiration in the coming weeks. But this is really, really basic. We're going to talk about a little bit today muscle physiology. I don't know if you guys have learned anything about it in the past. It's pretty interesting. It's actually not, it's still a theory. It hasn't been proven, but we're like 99.9999% certain that it happens this way, but it actually has not been directly observed. We'll talk about that. Okay, so cells and entropy. This is a nice way to kind of conceptualize this. So you can take glucose, for example, super organized molecule, and it has all this potential energy because it's really unstable. It's all packed together. Um, the way I think about it is like, um, you know, and this is good talking about like the social distancing too. Like, but even before social distancing, if I grouped, you know, the entire class all together in the center of the class, and then I said, okay, you can sit wherever you want, everyone's going to dissipate. Everyone's going to get as far away from each other as possible. It's like if you go into like a restaurant, they say like you can sit wherever you want. You don't pick the table right in the middle of the restaurant. Nobody does that. You pick the tables toward the ends, right? Because nobody likes anybody. Everybody wants to get as far away from each other as possible, right? It's natural, and it's this law of entropy. Um, so glucose will want to release that potential energy as kinetic energy, and split into carbon dioxide and water. And when it does this, it releases energy, and that energy can be used, which we'll see, to make ATP. Um, and it will be converted to a less potential energy, more stable entropy, um, just more stable. The environment is always going to go towards stability, which is usually more spread out. Um, Another way that we can see this, which directly relates to what we just talked about, is with channel proteins over a cell membrane. You can see an unequal distribution of hydrogen ions inside of a cell here. And they want to move out of the cell, right? They want to have an equal concentration inside and outside, right? We talked about that. We want to achieve an isotonic solution. So what they'll do is they'll move through that protein channel to a more stable configuration with less potential energy. Okay, so let's talk about the second law further. The processes occurring in cells are energy transformations. Every process in cells increases the total entropy in the universe. Therefore, less energy is available to do useful work. So one example is glucose breaking apart into carbon dioxide and water, which you talked about. Another example is kind of like comparing this to like a neat room, right? If you keep your room really, really neat, it's more organized, but it's less stable than a messy room, right? It requires energy to make a messy room neat, right? But it really doesn't require much energy to, make that neat room not messy, right? And you can think of a messy room as more stable, right? It's easier to keep it messy than it is to keep it neat. Similarly, the input of energy from photosynthesis from the sun makes glucose from carbon dioxide and water. Yeah, we kind of talked about this. All right, so let's talk about metabolism. Real quick, does anyone have any questions about potential energy, kinetic energy, work, thermodynamics, any of that? Entropy?
No,
Okay,
I think.
cool. Okay, so let's talk about metabolism. So I'm sure you've heard of metabolism, slow metabolism, and fast metabolism. Well, metabolism is a much more broad term that really just means the sum of reactions, right? The total sum of all of a chain of reactions. So the react, just like a chemical formula, we have reactants and products. And let's see. So real quick, so free energy is the amount of energy available to perform work. Exergonic reaction. So this is when you have a reaction that's going to release energy. And the end result is going to have less energy than the reactant. So you're starting off with something that's really unstable. Like if we take ATP, which we're going to talk about in a second, you take something like ATP that's really unstable, and then we release energy, and the final product is ADP and a more stable molecule. You can think about this as like, if it's everybody clumped together in the middle of a room, it's very unstable. They're all going to have a lot of energy because they're all going to want to get away, and they're going to move apart, release energy to move apart. And when everyone is separated, then they're more relaxed and they're in a lower energy state. These will occur spontaneously. It's kind of similar to like things moving along their concentration gradient. It's going to move, in this direction as it occurs without the input of any energy. Endergonic reactions are going to be the opposite. They're going to require energy. And this is when we're creating a molecule that, one sec. they're going to be creating a molecule that has more energy than when we started with. Give me one sec, guys. I have to just do something real quick. Sorry, guys. All right. Sorry about that. All right, so we just talked about inorganic reactions. Cool. All right. So this was kind of the example that I was talking about before, but I want to go more into detail. So with ATP, this is going to be the main currency with cells. So the most important energy molecule. And ATP is a really unstable molecule. It does not like to be ATP. When it's ATP, it wants to release energy really, really bad. We're going to see why. So it's a high energy compound. It's used to drive these metabolic reactions. It's not stored in cells. What is stored in cells is ADP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, tri meaning 3 phosphate ions. Adenosine diphosphate, as you can imagine, di standing for 2, adenosine with 2 phosphate ions. So when it's adenosine diphosphate, it's super stable, really low energy. And then when it gets that 3rd phosphate on it, it gets really unstable and it has a lot of energy and it wants to get rid of it and get back to ADP. So cells will not store this volatile ATP. Instead, they'll store ADP, and when it needs energy, it'll throw a phosphate on that ADP, form ATP, use it really fast, and then return it back to ADP. ATP is composed of adenine ribose, which is a sugar, and then 3 phosphate groups. And energy released by an exergonic reaction or reaction is captured in ATP. ATP is then used to drive an endergonic reaction. So this will make sense in a second. So let me go through this cycle of slides here. So this is kind of the ATP cycle that I'm going to go through. So the very first step is adenosine triphosphate. We have it, it's unstable, super high potential energy, wants to get rid of this 3rd phosphate. That's why it's kind of bonded in this weird little way. So what happens is it goes through an exergonic reaction, right? It's really volatile and it releases energy. So it releases this energy and it kicks off this phosphate. So now it's ADP, or it's becoming ADP. So the hydrolysis, because that's what's happening here. Remember, hydrolysis and dehydration reactions. Hydrolysis, we are adding water and we are splitting something. So we add water to the end of this bond here, and we split this phosphate off of it. This releases the stored potential energy and allows the change in free energy to do work and drive these metabolic processes. And it ends up having a negative delta G, essentially meaning it's releasing energy. This happens with protein synthesis, nerve contraction, or nerve conduction, muscle contraction, really anything that requires work with cellular processes. So you can see that we've now made ADP, which is the adenosine diphosphate, and there's a phosphate ion that was split off. So now this ADP can be stored in cells. But when the cells now, let's say you're working out, you're lifting weights, and you just use this ATP to lift some weights. But you're not done lifting weights, you need more ATP. Well, what the cell is going to do is they're going to transfer this ADP back into ATP. So how does it do that? Well, it has to go through an endergonic reaction, right? It needs energy to do that. It needs energy to make this ATP molecule. So it requires this energy or input, and it gets it from other sources like breaking down glucose. So it'll break down glucose, and when it does so, it can get this ATP or this energy formation to form ATP from this ADP molecule. And this will end up with a positive G, or a positive delta G rather, meaning it is now a volatile high energy ion as ATP that can be used to conduct work. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about muscle fizz, just because it's a good example here. It gets way more complicated when you get into like anatomy, but this is kind of the basics of it. So you've got this myosin head. So basically you have myosin and actin in muscle fiber. So when you get super microscopic, you get an actin and a myosin, and they pull on one another. And the way that they pull along one another is myosin has these little heads that come up. So these little heads, when they come up, they don't do anything when they're in their resting spot. But when ATP attaches to this myosin head, then it will it'll assume this upright resting position. Okay. Then the ATP will split into ADP. And when it splits into ADP, then the myosin changes its shape and it can now attach to the actin. Okay, so now it's attached to the actin and it's released this piece. So now, or this phosphate. So now it's released a little bit of energy to get that to attach on. When it attaches on and it releases the ADP now, what it does is it actually will change the myosin head again. And when it changes the head, it kind of folds over. And when it folds over, it pulls on that actin. And when it pulls on that actin, it generates force and motion. And that's what actually moves a muscle. So it's those three little things happening. The ATP initially changing the shape, releasing its phosphate so that it can attach onto this actin, and then releasing the ADP so that it folds back and pulls. Then once it pulls again, then it will release from the actin, and it can restart. That's how you lift things. All muscle phys is pulling and relaxing, or contracting and relaxing. That's every single muscle is contracting and relaxing. Okay, so last thing that we're going to talk about here is metabolic pathways and enzymes, and we're just going to talk about it briefly, and then we'll talk more about enzymes next class. Reactions normally occur in a sequence, like I kind of said with metabolic pathways. So you can see at the bottom here, we've got A to B to C to D to E to F to G. So we might start with A, which is our initial reactant, right? This initial thing could be glucose, but our end product might be insulin. We have a long way to go to change glucose into insulin. We have to change it into multiple different things before we finally get it to what we finally need. So this whole pathway is a metabolic pathway. Now, what happens in this case is, little terminology. So a substrate is going to be the reactants of these metabolic processes. So this is A is our initial substrate, B is our initial product, which will become our next substrate for the next reaction. And these will all be intermediate substrates to finally get to our end product G. Okay. But in order to have these reactions occur, we need an enzyme. And each one of these processes requires a specific enzyme. So the enzyme is specific to the substrate, and it will convert it into something else. Each enzyme accelerates the specific reaction. Yeah, very important. The end product will not be formed unless all enzymes in the pathway are present and functional, right? Because it's kind of self-explanatory, but we need every single enzyme working properly, or else we'll get stuck at if we can't change E to F, then we can't just skip it and go from E to G. It's got to go from E to F. So we need every single enzyme working properly so that we can convert every single substrate into the next substrate in the metabolic pathway to get our final product at the end. So we're going to talk next class about enzymes. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the enzyme substrate complex, which is really easy. It's just like a lock and key model, but there's a lot of little things that we need to know that's going to be probably a little bit different than what you've gone over in like past biology classes, a little bit more specific, but you should have gone over it actually in the summer assignments. As far as the induced fit model, the cofactors, coenzymes, things like that, and what can happen there. Also on Friday, I'm going to do a little activity that will hopefully, make some of these things a little bit easier to understand, like competitive inhibition and non-competitive inhibition, things like that. But if anything, I do highly recommend reading chapter 6, and more importantly, reading the end of chapter 6. The last few pages where they talk about enzymes is so important for this course. So I highly recommend just giving that a quick little read through. But yeah, so that is all I've got today. So the next thing that you guys are going to be doing is getting started working on the McGraw-Hill assignments. I think it's just the 3 assignments with videos and some questions. They're going to be due Friday morning. Okay. Do you guys have any questions or anything? No. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna let you guys go, and then at you guys want to come back at like 10:40, or yeah, like 10:40, we'll say, then we'll do LTV. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. See you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.